country has a hung parliament, where no party has an overall majority, and we have some deep and pressing problems. A huge deficit, deep social problems, a political system in need of reform. For those reasons, I aim to form a proper and full coalition between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. I believe it can be a strong and stable government, able to provide the country with the strong and stable leadership that we need. My invitation to the Liberal Democrats to join us in tackling the problems that we face, in helping to make this country more fairer and more responsible at home and more open and outward-looking abroad, has been accepted. Of course, there will be problems. It will be a coalition in which we will have to work hard to overcome differences and forge the common ground in which we take the country forward. But I believe we are capable of doing that. Indeed, I believe it is the right way to provide this country with the strong, stable, good and decent government that I think we need so badly. This is going to be hard and difficult. And then skipping ahead here, it goes on to say, the coalition government will now begin to take the difficult decisions together so that together we could take this country forward in a way that I believe will be fair and responsible, and in which I will take Britain in a better direction. So, this was an extract of the then Prime Minister David Cameron.
That's the most important thing of all, winning the trust of people that have put their trust in us, many of them for the first time, and Boris will have my full support as he does that.
Well, I don't know why he's talking to a tree.
Literally only hours into his new role, delivering an address to the media and the public outside Downing Street, announcing the formation of a coalition government with, of course, the Liberal Democrats. It was the first coalition in which we exclude the wartime coalition of 1940 to 1945 to be formed since the early 1930s. The first time a British Liberal Party held positions of power since World War II, in which our parent party, the Liberal Party, held cabinet positions as part of that wartime coalition. But more importantly, it was the first time in which the Liberal Democrats' own history had entered government at all. But if we include the old Liberal Party, it was the first time since 1931 we held significant number of cabinet positions in government. A landmark moment, a turning point, not only a significant achievement for the party, but a significant moment in the story of modern British politics. And to think that back in 1981, when David Steel of the Liberal Party of old, some 29 years ago in 2010, delivered the famous line, "Go back to your constituencies and prepare for government." Not quite nailed David Steele's impression there, but there we go, we're learning.
Special delivery!
In which, although it was not impossible back then, it was still seen by most as a pipe dream. But this was finally realised in 2010. In this debate, three Liberal Democrats from different wings of our party will debate whether the coalition should be remembered as a proud moment of Liberal Democrats finally entering government, or as a moment of the rapture that tore through our party and left lasting scars. Welcome to my channel. My name is Andy and I am the Yellow Rebel. I am joined with my regular panellists Luke George and Matthew Hulbert. Luke is a TikToker, business graduate, proud Orange Booker, founder of the Institute for Growth, and sits on the right of the Lib Dems on economic issues. Matthew is a former journo, a Talk TV fixture who is described as someone as their audience loves to hate. His words, not mine, as I've just learned recently when I met you, Matthew. Also a YouTuber in his own right, as a co-host of Political Frenemies, and of course his own channel. And more importantly, because this was going to be very important in this debate, a former councillor for the Lib Dems during that time of the coalition era, and then returned to local politics a bit before retirement from it. He is also a social liberal. And I am your host, Andy, the centrist dad who will be moderating this debate, and that's basically my resume. I'm just a nobody, really.
Nobody cares. Nobody cares.
Oh, very kind, Matthew. Very, very kind of you. Now, before we go on to debate whether the coalition, with the passage of time, should be looked at more favourably, I should say, or if they have a lot of answers to, or if they have a lot of answers in the social ills of this country that we've seen today, I think it might be a good jumping off point for all of us to ask where we were in our life when the coalition was formed. And for a change, I'm not going to go over to Matthew first because I try not to pick favourites. I am not Queen Anne. If you know your film references, then you'll get the joke.
Look at me! How dare you! Close your eyes!
Instead, I will kickstart this myself, and then I will go over to Luke and then Matthew. So you're going to have to be very patient, Matthew, this time. But first, if you like this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So I'm going to start off first. So for me, Andy in 2010 was at university. And I think that's quite important that we note that because there's context there. I was a year in university. I was a year in university, but I was also a year as being a Liberal Democrat member as well. Not politically as active as I am today, admittedly, but I was involved in the Lib Dems student society, helping with campaigns and, of course, going to the socials because basically, that's what you like to do when you're at university, really. As much as I like my door knocking, it was mostly there for the socials, the drinking, a lot of drinking, too much drinking.
And I'm ready to party!
Now, to help my audience, my panel to understand my headspace when I was going through this. So I joined the Lib Dems a year earlier when I could at 18. I was inspired by the politics of Charles Kennedy in my teenage years. I agreed with their stance on Iraq. I agreed with their stance on civil liberties. And more importantly, their commitment to free university tuition fees, which by that point had been a fixture of their manifestos and basically formed the political identity of the party and was just the party for me, really. Now, so when the election came, if I had it my way, aside from us winning outright, although we believe in PR, so realistically, we wouldn't have that in a PR system, but there we go. But apart from winning outright, I wanted a coalition with Labour. They're just simply closer to my politics. I think broadly they still are, although I'm not too sure with Keir Starmer now. And for me, I just grew up in a household who were just deeply distrustful of Conservative governments generally. So then came the 2010 campaign and, of course, Clegg mania, which I think we need to note as well. And it suddenly felt like we had an actual fighting chance. So I threw myself into campaigning, doing the leaflets, the door knocking, all the stuff like that that I could do as like a 19-year-old. So I was disappointed with the election results, of course, both in our own showing, because I think we were at least going to increase our seats, but we ended up actually seeing a small decline of our seats, and the share of the vote didn't see. I always remember David Dimbleby saying, well, that can't be right. When they give the exit poll, it always makes me chuckle. Maybe it shows a little bit of David Dimbleby's allegiance, who knows. But also, as well, the Conservatives had done. So the maths just simply wasn't there for us or Labour, which I think, again, it's important to note this. So in reality, the only route to government was with the Tories. Now, I wasn't going to oppose a deal with the Tories just for opposition's sake, because I think we forget at the time, and I know Matthew might not agree, might not agree or agree, but I think we forget at the time the country was facing a debt crisis, and I could see the guild markets. The markets were shaken by the idea of a coalition just happening, and it just didn't look like it might be formed. So I think we needed that stability. And I thought, all right, maybe we could hold the Conservatives to account from within government. And yes, I was disappointed with the only electoral reform we got from that deal was the AV referendum, which we can, of course, explore. And yes, I did feel like we gave quite a weak hand on that. But, as much as I've got hostilities towards the Tories based on my own upbringing, I wasn't going to be hostile at that time for the sake of hostility. So, I was willing to compromise on that. And while my view at the time is perhaps more favourable now, which again, Matthew might be a little bit surprised, what really did it for me at that time, both on a personal and political level, was the tuition fees. Because you have to remember, this was Andy at university. And I do believe passionately that we should have lifelong education. It should be free, much like how health is today, cradle to the grave, lifelong learning. Cradle to the grave, healthcare, cradle to the grave, lifelong learning. That's just my own politics. So for me, Andy at university just felt like that was a moment of betrayal.
You lied to me.
And betrayal is the word that sticks out for me from that coalition. And after that, I saw overnight, and again, bringing back, university Andy, when they voted for those tuition fees rise, which they, if we believe George Osborne, they could have had a choice to abstain from the vote at least, but Nick Clegg allegedly pushed through that. We can't confirm it because I don't think Nick Clegg has actually confirmed that himself. But, if that is true, then again, I think that was a betrayal. But overnight, I saw my own local branch and the Lib Dems University Society's base just collapse. It just completely collapsed. And back then, I just saw I just saw this as so consequential, and this was just going to be unforgivable for us. And I still think we're reeling from it. It's better now, but I still think we're reeling from it. So I ended up joining Labour after that. And then eventually rejoining the Lib Dems in 2017. So I was quite passionate on that, on that sort of betrayal. That word that keeps sticking out in my mind. But I did rejoin the Lib Dems in 2017 following Brexit and of course Corbyn. So yeah, that's just my view on it. And I go over to Luke now on this. So Luke, take ahead. So where were you when the coalition was formed? If you're too young, then maybe you can sort of discuss, sort of post coalition, what your feelings were towards it of the sort of recent memory of the coalition.
Yeah, sure. I mean, when the coalition was formed, I was still at school. I remember Call of Duty Black Ops. Anyone play that? No, just
Okay.
joking. But no,
I do.
I didn't know anything about politics. I didn't know left or right. I didn't know anything about economics or anything like that. But I did watch the debate with Gordon Brown, David Cameron,
Okay.
and Nick Clegg. Now, I'm not going to lie, at the time, I didn't really care for what Nick Clegg had to say. I thought it was just a choice out of Gordon Brown and David Cameron. And I know that we were in a serious potential fiscal crisis. We were in a mess. Something was wrong. And I remember David Cameron saying, we have got to bring the deficit down. We've got to bring it down. And Nick Clegg said that as well. They were both very concentrated on bringing this deficit down. And I also remember between 2010 and 2015, as I was growing up, Greece was going under, Spain was going under, Italy was going under, Portugal was going under. I remember sat there eating my tea one night at home from school, and the BBC showed the levels of debt and deficits that those countries were running. And I was very, very influenced by that. That did influence my views. And then 2014, I got into politics. I joined the Conservative Party. And at the time, it was a one nation Tory with a bit of Thatcherism on the economy. But looking back on it, the coalition gets blamed for everything. I mean, it's everything that's gone wrong. But let's just have a look at some of the economic data, because I'm sorry,
There we go.
the
You love the
data.
data.
Yeah, but it's true.
GDP.
Let's have a look at the deficit. The deficit went from, it was 10% of GDP in 2010. By 2015, the deficit fell to 5% of GDP. They halved the deficit. If you look at unemployment, 7.9% in 2010, 5.4% in 2015. Huge drop in unemployment, huge drop in youth unemployment. interest rates came down, inflation came down, so the austerity clearly calmed the markets. Because if you look at what happened in Greece and the Mediterranean in 2012, their bond market yields went all the way up to 10%. It's clear that New Labour and Gordon Brown lost control of the public finances. So when I keep hearing that, oh, austerity was a public choice. Yeah, yeah. See where that got Greece, all that deficit spending. But as well, we're here 14 years of no economic growth. We've had stagnation for 14 years. Not true. 2014, the UK economy grew at 3%. That's ONS. 2015, it grew at 2.3%. We were back to trendline 2% economic growth. So it's not true that we had 14 years of economic stagnation. GDP per capita between 2010 and 2015 grew at 6%, not per annum, but for the whole thing. Not great, but not awful. As the famous Chernobyl quote is, if everyone watched that series and they take
Yes.
the reading and he goes, not great, not awful. But overall, the
I
economic...
wouldn't use Chernobyl to try in defense of the coalition.
No,
But
but
carry on.
no, it's the quote, not great, not awful.
Yeah.
But overall, they did a good job. Now, don't get me wrong, they did a lot of nonsense. I mean, they raised the capital gains tax. That was stupid. They did the Google tax. They did the bank levy. That was silly. But once they put in the corporate tax cuts, the top rate of tax from 50 to 45, they increased the personal allowance. They put in the help to buy ISA. They increased the stocks and shares limit. What else did they do? They increased the minimum wage as well. They were
Tax
pretty good.
allowances.
Tax, yeah, personal allowance. They cut welfare payments. That was the right thing to do. They incentivized a lot of people going into work. I thought they were very good overall. Not perfect, but I thought they did a really good job.
Okay, I've made some notes because, but for Matthew, feel free to rebuttal some of that. But I have made notes so we can explore that because I think it was, obviously this is just to returning back to my original question. It's just see where we were in politics, and obviously I can understand Luke's because he was, quite young, but still, his engagement in politics was beginning to blossom. So, but Matthew, where were you when the coalition was formed? And if you want to rebuttal some of Luke's points and give your own assessment, but the main thing I want to sort of like dig into is like where you were, because obviously you've got quite a interesting story because you were at some point you did become a councillor. So yeah, over to Matthew.
So Andy and Luke, great to be with you again for our latest debate. Have been very excited for this one. So just a few little preamble things first from me. I'm wearing black because I thought it was appropriate, given that our party very nearly died as a result of the coalition.
Whose funeral is it? Yours.
I'm also, one of the books that I'm resting my camera on here, my phone on, is, because I just thought it was really appropriate, is David Law's Coalition Diaries, 2012 to 2015. Not one of my favourite people, but actually a book I really enjoyed because I always enjoy reading about like the day-to-day lives of ministers. I find it fascinating. And then also, it's good that we're doing this because Mr. Clegg is back in the news. Oh, yes, he is. So I only saw this today, but actually it's from a couple of days ago that he's given an interview because he's got a book out. I mean, who hasn't right now, right? He's got a book out, a tech bro book, because, he's really tech bro now, like Tony Blair. And so the quote, I mean, obviously these books, they have to have something to sell them, don't they? And the headline of this interview is a quote from Nick Clegg. At Meta, I found myself wrestling my deputy in an MMA gym. There we are. Nick Clegg on the culture shock of Silicon Valley. So there we go, folks. You can go to The Guardian and find that out. So it's really appropriate that we're not just talking historically here. Mr. Clegg is back in the news, so it's a good time to be talking about the coalition. So I joined the Lib Dems in March 2010. I should set out, and I get the piddle taken out of me the whole time by votes because the Lib Dems is actually my third political party. It took me a while to find my political home in the Liberal Democrats. And I still get that now, and I've been in the party 15 years, you know, so it's ridiculous. But I joined Labour as a teenager. I joined Labour at 18 in 1998. I was very taken by Mr. Blair at the time. I mean, first term Tony Blair, I really liked. After that, not so much. But I joined Labour in 1998. I left Labour in 2003 over Iraq. I really wished I'd joined the Lib Dems then. I don't know why I didn't, but I didn't. I was basically out of politics for a few years then. I then was very taken by Caroline Lucas, and again, I still am. I think she's fantastic. So joined the Greens. Realised that whilst they were very pleasant people, the party was slightly, well, how can I put this? Different. And you'll know what I mean by that.
You're very careful there.
Yeah, absolutely. So then I got to know a lot of the local Lib Dems here in Hinckley and Bosworth. Very successful local party here in Hinckley and Bosworth. They ran the council then, and they run the council now. So there was this big thing in Lib Dem News, which was the former Lib Dem kind of newspaper, where it just shows you how ridiculous it is, because I wasn't really a senior Green at all. I was the press officer of Leicester Green Party. But there was a bit in Lib Dem News saying senior Green defects to Lib Dems. So there we are. So I defected to the Lib Dems.
Oh, Newsday.
I know. Defected to the Lib Dems in March 2010. And so defected in the March of 2010, only to find out the Lib Dems were entering government in the May-June of 2010 with the Conservatives. I mean, you can imagine how well that went down with me. And then I became a councillor in May of 2011 until I lost my seat, largely because of the coalition, in May 2015. So you can imagine my thoughts on the coalition, broadly speaking. Now, do I think we had any choice? No, I don't, because I think if we'd have sat on our hands and remained in opposition, what would that have said about us as a supposedly serious political party? So I didn't oppose as going into government. I didn't much like it, but I didn't oppose it. I would just correct you on one thing, Andy, if I just may, which is that it was the first time we were in UK government as the Liberal Democrats, but we really mustn't forget that before that we'd been in the Scottish executive, as it was at the time.
That is true.
And we've been in the Welsh government as well. So the Liberal Democrats had experience at a national level.
Oh, we've used it with Labour. With Labour,
and both of those with Labour, so they were much less controversial coalitions. But we did have national government experience. But you're quite right; it was the first time at a UK level, as the Liberal Democrats, as the merged party of the Liberals and the SDP, the former Liberals and SDP. Not talking about the barely continuing ones that still drag on to this day. But that we'd entered UK-wide government, and this was a really big moment for us. But I'm gonna pressure Mr. George on this in a moment. And I know he's not said it, but Orange Bookers often do. They often say Nick Clegg led us into government. Well, give me a break. He lost seats in both of the elections that he led us into. And of course, in 2015, we barely survived. I mean, we barely returned with any seats at all. But even in 2010, we lost seats. This wasn't some great victory for Nick Clegg, where he led us into government. No, the numbers just meant that for the first time in 80 years, we were able to hobble into a coalition. So the idea that Nick Clegg led us into government is a load of old codswallop. He was just the leader at the time. And then I think that they were just hugely naive. If I was to be really unfair, and of course, as if I ever am, if I was to be really unfair,
never.
I would say that they were too bedazzled by the ministerial cars and the red boxes and the being in government that not enough attention was paid. And I really do hope that Luke might agree on this, at least at some level, that not enough attention was paid to how is this going to look to our voters? What decisions that we're taking, the pronouncements that we're making, what are our voters going to think about that? And how can we act to pacify our voters? And so do I think that the coalition had any choice in happening? No, I don't. But do I think that it resulted well for our party at least? Well, of course it didn't. We ended up with 8 seats.
I'm going to, in response to that, Matthew, I'm going to probe Luke on that. Because Matthew, how's it going to look, the image? But Matthew, if I'm going to have a slight criticism, you talked about Thatcher and compromise and how she was uncompromising. Now, in coalitions, you do have to have compromises.
Right.
So I find that interesting that you say, oh, well, it's compromise unless we do a deal
Well,
with the Tories.
Can I answer that? And I know you want to go
Yeah,
back to Luke
okay, quick. Yeah,
I'll be
yeah.
very brief, Andy. I promise. So, of course, I'm in favour of compromise. I've no problem with compromise, and of course, you know, those of us who support PR, as I think all three of us here do, have got to recognise that. That is going to probably end up with multi-party governments, which I support, the European kind of style, European system. And of course, that means that you don't get everything in your manifesto. No problem with that at all. My problem is how it was presented and how it looked to our voters. That's my issue.
But would it be less so problematic if the numbers were there for Labour? Or would it still have been problematic?
Of course, there still would have been problems, but for our, you said it yourself, Andy, in your own contribution, that, and I know probably Luke wouldn't necessarily agree with this, but I think for most Lib Dems who are broadly centre to centre left, it just would have been a far more natural coalition. Now, there still would have been problems. You know, government is fraught with problems, and there still would have been issues, and there still would have been personality clashes, and all of that. But I just don't think it would have been as much of a shock as it was to our voters.
Okay. Luke, so over to you now. That seems to be my saying on this podcast. Yes, I think you mentioned about the deficit. So let's explore that, the deficits, because, you know, I do remember, you know, I was a teenager, so older than you, Luke, but I was engaged in politics by then. And I did remember the stock markets, the bond yields and all that going crazy, because not even before the coalition had been formed. It's the idea of, because it's so new in British politics to have coalitions. For our European audiences, we don't have proportional representation. We have first past the post. And the logic is with first past the post, you tend to have majority governments. But in these circumstances, it did not produce that. And it was just new territory for, and also the polls were just, even though we did get the Clegg mania, I think most polls thought certain that the Conservatives could win at least a slender majority, you know, when the Clegg mania began to die down. So, but do you think there's an argument there? Because I get that the deficit needs to be sorted, it needs to be done. I think the markets, you could tell from the, you know, from the idea of from the election result that the bond markets were going crazy. And I think all countries were suffering from that. But I think there has to be some reckoning, because we hear the word austerity, and you could have arguments about how much is it overused? You know, was that, you know, word overused a lot? But I think I think all three of us on this panel will not disagree that the deficit had to be sorted and the debt crisis had to be sorted. Oh, okay. Different opinion from Matthew, but the scale of it, you know, was seen as too deep, you know, too harsh, too cruel. You know, it returns back to like what you said, Thatcher probably didn't go far enough, you know, but this could be an argument that actually at that time it probably did go too far. And they probably should have made adjustments, and the Lib Dems should have, you know, used their Lib Dem numbers to have had a better hand at it. So, yeah.
Well, if we're going to argue whether the word austerity was overused, I think so. I mean, if we're arguing that the austerity was too harsh, no. Right, the coalition didn't actually cut spending per se. All they did was slow down the projected growth of spending. That's all they did. Now, in the Eurozone, in the Mediterranean, where they didn't sort out their deficit, they actually cut spending. They had what was called the Troika austerity, which was really severe austerity. Okay. So all we did, let's say government spending was set to grow 200 billion, let's just say. All the coalition did was slow it down to, let's say, 100 billion. But that's still an increase. Whereas in Greece, they did actually literally cut spending in absolute terms.
But it's real term cuts, Luke. If you freeze spending, then inflation.
But they didn't
You know,
freeze it.
you've done
No,
economics.
they didn't freeze it. They just slowed it down they just slowed down the growth. It still went up. All they did was slow down the growth.
How do you
Okay.
explain Sure Start centres closing then?
Well, they merged them. They merged them. They
Well,
did.
I mean, come on.
They didn't close them per se. They
No,
merged
come on.
them.
I'll bloody find him and I'll bloody kill him! And I'll bloody eat him! I'll kill him and I'll eat him!
Come on, let's have some honesty here. And this is really serious actually,
They did.
because there were cases of people, welfare recipients, often people with very bad disabilities, mental health conditions, etc., who took their own lives according to notes that were left, etc., precisely because of the welfare changes that were made by the coalition government. So I'm afraid I just won't have it that the changes were kind of negligible and that the changes were unimportant and that people going on about austerity were somehow not quite telling the truth. I mean lives were lost as a direct result of the austerity brought in by those ministers.
I suppose Luke's argument in his answer is that if we didn't do anything, then we would have seen more cuts.
Yeah.
Would that be fair to say,
Well,
Luke?
That's what happened in Greece. Yeah, and then what I'll respond with is, austerity really hurt the poor. Okay, well, tell me what the conditions are like for poor people in Greece, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Argentina, Japan, where they didn't sort out their deficits. A lot worse.
Well, quite. Can I just show you something here, because
Yes.
I've just found it, because it popped up on my Facebook memories the other day. But it is just a pic. I hope you can see it if I show you on screen. It's a picture of me questioning the Deputy Prime Minister at the time when he came to Oadby. I don't know if you can see it. So I'm over here, and Nick Clegg is over there.
I didn't see this, Muff. I meant to see you.
So that is me questioning Nick Clegg in no uncertain terms when he visited Leicestershire when he was the Deputy Prime Minister. Look, I should say that whenever on the 3 or 4 occasions that I got to meet him in those years, he was nothing other than what you'd expect him to be, which was very nice and utterly charming and a decent liberal guy. I'm not claiming he wasn't liberal to his fingertips. On social issues, he was more liberal than people I much more supported at the time, like Tim Farron, I came to subsequently learn. So, was he a decent liberal? Yes, he absolutely was. But did he almost lead liberalism down the gurgler? Well, clearly he did. We came out of the 2015 election with just 8 seats. So you can think 2 different things about people at the same time, right? And so I want to be fair. And I want to say straight away, I will never totally condemn a government that gave me and millions of people like me, gay and bi people in this country, more liberty and more equality than we had prior to that government. And when Labour and the Tories try and say that this wasn't a Lib Dem achievement, that's a load of bollocks, because it absolutely was. It would not have happened, and I know that all 3 of us here will agree, it would not have happened without the Liberal Democrats. The idea the Tories would have done it by themselves was for the birds, because, and the Tories hate this when I point this out, but it's a fact that they can't deny. Whilst David Cameron was supportive, and he absolutely was, and good on him, and whilst Theresa May was supportive, and good on her, most Tory MPs either voted against or abstained. Those are just the facts of that matter, and it wouldn't have got through without Labour votes, so they deserve some credit as well. But in terms of who was driving the initiative, it was the Lib Dems, and it was especially Lynn Featherstone, who is my favourite government minister of all time. She by promoting and seeing through that legislation, she extended liberty for millions of people. And if that's not the definition of liberalism, I don't know what is. So thank you very much, Lynn Featherstone. And I have met her in person once, but we keep saying that we must meet up in Parliament. So I must make sure that happens, because I think she's fantastic. So I'll never totally condemn a government that did that. I'll never condemn a government that put the spending on international development up to 0.7% of GDP, and that was a Lib Dem thing too, because yes, the government had to support it, but it was the government backed a backbench bill by the then backbench MP, Lib Dem MP Michael Moore. So I'll never condemn that.
Not the film director, by the way, guys.
No, the Lib Dem, the Scottish Lib Dem MP, who had been a Secretary of State, but this was when he was back on the backbenches that he saw through this, and the government supported it. That would have changed and saved thousands of lives in Africa and other parts of the world. I was a school governor at the time. I also won't condemn a government that put through the pupil premium that I saw helping some of our poorest pupils in Barwell and across the country. And I also won't condemn a government that lifted that lifted the tax burden for low earners. So all of those things were good things. But they also did, as I've just said earlier on, introduced welfare cuts that led to people taking their own lives. So we've got to look at the broad thrust of what the coalition did.
I just want to like tell all our audience about the gay marriage vote. I'll just give the statistics. So 136 Conservatives opposed it. And then if I scroll down, for some reason the BBC has given me, and 127 voted in favour. So that's a clear majority that voted against it. And I think you are right. I think.
And many abstained.
Do you think? But yeah, it almost sounds like you actually think there are some good. The Lib Dems actually brought in some goods, Matthew. Which but
absolutely.
Do you think that? Alex, do you think we didn't talk in the election of 2015? Do you think there's a case that we didn't talk up our achievements? Because in European politics, it's common for the smaller party to suffer because the bigger party, the bigger partner in that coalition, often reaps the rewards and benefits. You know, and you saw it with Angela Merkel when she was hugely popular, but actually their own the Liberal Party called the FDP over there, who are more like to Luke's politics, Orange Book. They would be like Orange Books of Germany. I think a lot of the popular policies was actually from the FDP. So, do you think there's actually a case that we didn't talk up in the 2015 election to say of our achievements?
Well, it's interesting.
I just invite Luke first, and then we'll come to you. Yeah, no worries.
Well, I can certainly talk from my own experience. Actually, a lot of what Matthew said there, I agree with. I remember broadly, actually agree with Matthew again. No, actually, a lot of what Matthew said, I actually agree with. I largely agree with Matthew. But I remember, I'm not going to lie, I'll be perfectly honest. I remember when we won the 2015 election, and I said, thank goodness we got rid of them Liberals. We can finally get down to business. And then 2016 came along and we voted Brexit. And I actually said, no joke, a year later, I said, oh my goodness, bring back the Liberals back. I can see what they were stopping now. But I'm not going to get too focused on the economy because I know I'm a bit of an economy maxi. But
which is you want, well, within reason.
Just on the austerity, Nick Clegg did delay deficit reduction by 1 year. Otherwise, the cuts were going to be a lot harsher. To be fair, the Tories wanted to go a lot further than. So Nick Clegg did stop a lot of it. We also did the pupil premium as well. That was us. But equal marriage was actually a big reason I joined the Lib Dems because for ages as a Tory, I says, "Oh, look how progressive we are as Tories. We legalised gay marriage. You didn't, Labour." But actually, it was the Lib Dems that pointed out to me, no, the majority of your MPs voted against it. It was the Lib Dems that did it. It's just Cameron took the credit.
I'll go to Matthew, but quick one. Like the early Liberal history, they were often, equality was often in a lot of Liberal manifestos. So we were actually, like Matthew would like to say, it's nice when Labour steal Liberal ideas, Liberal Party, SDP, or now Lib Dem ideas. So I just thought I'd point that out. Yes, Matthew.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the FDP. Andy, because of course they have now twice been chucked out of the German Parliament as a result of being in coalition governments. I'm saddened to see that because I'm always saddened to see Liberal parties, even if they're more to the economic Liberal side, be chucked out of parliaments. But sadly, it tends to be what happens to small parties that are in coalitions. So I mean, it happens to smaller parties, and it seems to be the unpopular governments. It's the smaller parties, if there is a coalition, that get the kick in rather than the bigger parties. I don't know why that is, but I occasionally do tweet, even still today, and even with Labour in government, because they've not been very good, have they, up to now, in most things. I sometimes tweet, those of you that got a great level of enjoyment out of kicking the Lib Dems out of government in 2015, look at all that has happened since. Look at all that has happened since. The EU vote, Boris, Liz Truss, this Labour government, which we had high hopes for, but has certainly not delivered yet. All of that has happened after the Lib Dems were given the kick in 2015.
Although you mentioned the EU vote, in 2010, all three parties said they'd have a referendum on
We
it.
were the first.
And then in,
I mean, what?
in 2015,
We were the first.
Yeah. Can I come back on that though?
Yes, of course,
But-
yeah.
Because Nick Clegg was quite clear, though, it was only a referendum if there's going to be a massive treaty change, like the Lisbon Treaty. So I
Right.
don't
Okay.
know if there
Okay.
was a huge treaty change between 2015 and 2016. I don't think there was. I think Cameron just did it because they wanted to stop Farage.
But Luke, can you answer me a question? Because it's really interesting, obviously, having you now as a Lib Dem, but as a Tory then. I gather that what David Cameron hoped, I don't know about other Conservatives, but what that David Cameron hoped, and probably George Osborne and the kind of clique around them at the top of the party at the time, hoped that the Lib Dems would be given a bit of a kick in, but would still have, I don't know, 25, 30 seats, 35, and the Tories would still need us, that we'd enter another coalition, and that he'd then be able to say, well, I'd love to have the European referendum, but, well, sorry, these Liberal Democrats are preventing me from doing so. Of course, what happened was, yes, he won the 2015 election with a majority, but it was like, oh, God, I've now got to actually have this EU referendum. And I mean, I gather also that he thought that he could just win all referendums because, from his perspective, he'd won two because I'm David Cameron and I can win referendums. Not knowing that actually the country's views on European matters had changed, and this isn't the Brexit debate. We can perhaps do that at another time to get into the weeds of that. But am I right in saying?
I think we're all in agreement on that, so it'd be quite a short one.
But am I? Well, to call it. Not a debate, then. Whatever you want to call it.
I think exploring it. Yeah,
absolutely. But Luke, can I ask you? I mean, was that the hope amongst the Cameroons that the Lib Dems would be hurt a bit, but still return to the government?
I'll be honest. Now, I wasn't an election strategist back then. I was just a canvasser. But from what I know at the time,
you've been an election strategist before.
No. I wasn't an election strategist.
Oh, right.
So
Okay.
I don't know what the overall strategy from the higher ups were, but from what I gathered, we were going for a majority, right? That was it. Apparently the message was the Liberals are stopping us from doing big tax cuts and actual big spending cuts, and if we just get rid of these Liberals, then we can really go for some pro-growth economics. Okay, that was the message. But what David Cameron did is he essentially did the referendum to stop Farage and thought he would win. And it backfired massively, hugely.
Yeah. Which we don't see.
And so actually, him winning I know you can only look at this in hindsight, of course, but actually him winning that majority in 2015 was the beginning of the countdown for him leaving office, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
can I just say as well, he also didn't have a very clear plan. We were surprised he was going all over the place after 2015. If you remember, he did the tax credits cut and then U-turned on it. I don't entirely think he knew what he wanted to do. We were bemused in the Tory party. We thought, what's going on?
It's interesting that welfare reform keeps coming up in successive governments, really, and I think
it's very difficult to do. It's very difficult to do.
Because it is politically sensitive. Because I must admit, I think if people are like Matthew are able to work on just cheating the system, then they need to be sorted out. But there has to be, and to be honest, I thought Labour would actually be able to do it, because whenever the Tories try to do it, you just get such. It's the distrustful. It goes back to like my upbringing of distrustfulness of the Tories. They will go too deeply, too far, and then with Labour, I still didn't think it was good. I didn't like the welfare reforms, but I at least thought they would do it with a lot more compassion and sensitivity.
The thing is, if you're going to do
Yeah.
welfare reform, look, let's be right. Welfare cuts are painful, right? They're not nice. Nobody likes them. If you're going to do them quickly at the start of the parliament. That's the way to do
Mm.
it.
Mm.
But actually, as has been pointed out in The Spectator recently, and Chris Newton, my co-host on Political, Dr. Lord King, Chris Newton, likes to point.
Dr. Lord King to you. Yeah.
Dr. Lord King, Chris Newton, likes to really make fun of me because I read The Spectator, but I like to find out what the enemy is thinking, right? So,
The enemies.
and I like to read Tim Shipman because he's always got his ear to the ground, whoever is in government. He was pointing out and actually I think it was Matthew Parris in The Spectator on this occasion was pointing out that Labour's heart will always be where Labour's heart is. And Labour's heart is with the poorest people in society. And so most backbench Labour MPs, especially if they think they're not going to be returned next time, right? And so this might be their only term in Parliament, don't want their political legacy to be, we supported welfare cuts. And Keir, if I can know that, then Keir Starmer and his political operatives and the folks at Number 10 should have known that. And the fact that they ended up having to make changes to that bill on the floor of the House, with the minister at the time having to intervene on the speech of a backbencher to say, we're not going to do it like this anymore. I know we can't change it on the face of the bill tonight, but we will be making these changes. I mean, it was chaotic, absolutely chaotic.
Luke, good points, Matthew, by the way, thank you, because that's just got me thinking, got me my brain cells working. Luke, so do you think it was disappointing? Because they did do some welfare reforms. I know it's a continuing conversation, and it does seem to be increasing. I do call it I don't like having to say this, but I do call it a British disease because it seems like Europe does not suffer from this, despite they have very generous welfare spending. Do you think it was quite disappointing that the austerity, welfare reforms, I should say, well, part of austerity, didn't give the full fruit? It seemed like that people were hostile to it, and we're still reeling from it now, because you'd think with a coalition it wasn't, you're never going to have a Labour and a Conservative coalition, although you can make arguments, it might be good for the country if political opposites did come together. But a party like the Conservatives that is economically, physically conservative and, and depending on which leader, quite socially conservative, but the Lib Dems, which is, I think, of recent time more closer politically to Labour. It's a centrist party, but it often, leans sometimes right, sometimes left, but it's a centrist party. Do you think it was quite disappointing that the welfare reforms had such hostility from the public, and maybe it didn't go I'm not supporting this argument, but it might have not gone far enough because of the coalition holding it back for the Conservatives?
Oh, I think they were perfectly okay. I wouldn't have gone any further with them. I thought they did well in getting them through, actually. I mean, remember, welfare reform is always unpopular. It's never going to be popular. And if you look at the mess of this government has made of it, I mean, largely because Labour are a party of social spending, whether you agree with that or not, that's their platform, that's what they believe in. So it always was going to be difficult for them to put that through. But you've just got to put it through, guys. If you're going to do it, you just got to put it through. And that's what we did with the universal credit changes and the cap on welfare payments. We knew it wasn't popular, but we said, look, this is the right thing for the country. It's the right thing in the long term. It's the right thing to get the deficit down. That word deficit again. But it's the right thing to get the deficit down. And although I wasn't a Lib Dem at the time, I was a Tory, we won re-election, didn't we?
Well,
You did, but look at all that followed. I mean, the
actually,
Well, yeah, but
EU referendum
that wasn't
followed,
my
Boris
fault.
followed, Liz Truss followed. I mean, give me a break, you know?
Oh yeah. Yeah,
actually,
to be fair, what followed it after Brexit?
let's discuss that, because in Cameron's speech he actually said the words strong and stable. I didn't realise that those words had like origins of David Cameron. You know, I always think of Theresa May really when I hear those words strong and stable, but apparently it had its origins with David Cameron in 2010. Now, did anyone think this coalition would last? Because there was a lot of mutterings that, and you know, I know it's a bit of, you know, everyone loves the political gossip, you know, over the grapevines, like, oh, you know, there's mutterings that it's going to collapse and blah, blah, blah. Did anyone think this coalition would last so long? And do we agree that in itself, that must have been an achievement given the difficult circumstances, and also for Clegg as well, because I think we have to remember there were social enough, you know, probably more social liberals than sort of Luke's liberalism. And it could have collapsed at any time. And I suppose more for Matthew, was there a point where you thought actually we should have pulled out from the coalition and we didn't show enough political bravery? So Matthew, I'll go. So yeah, Matthew, if you can answer that.
Yeah, thanks. So it's interesting. I was just sat here thinking that, I mean, I think in truth, and I mean, who knows, because this wasn't the circumstances, but I do wonder if I'd not have been a Lib Dem councillor and felt, you know, I'm not one particularly for councillors defecting. I mean, I know that before I was a councillor, I went from the Greens to the Lib Dems, so you might say I'm hypocritical, but I think once you've been elected under certain party banners, really you should stay under those party banners, or you should fight a by-election and leave. And so I do wonder if I'd not been a Lib Dem councillor, whether I would have stayed in the party during the coalition years. But I think it's perhaps likely that I quite possibly wouldn't have. I think I did because I felt a great sense of debt to the party that ultimately I've not been elected really because I was Matthew Hall, but I've been elected because I was a Liberal Democrat in 2011. And so I felt a debt to the party in that sense, and to the local party as well, who've always been so good with me. So I do wonder if I'd not been a councillor, whether I would have stayed in the party. Who knows is the honest answer to that. But were they easy years? No, they weren't. And and I lost my seat in 2015 along with thousands of other councillors, along with thousands of other Lib Dem councillors, and none of that was our fault. And so that is really tough, you know. So councillors lost their seats. Almost all of our MPs lost our seats. We paid a very heavy price for that government, and that is those are just politically the facts. And it's really taken until last year with the election of 72 Lib Dem MPs that we've actually turned the party around, and full credit to all our leaders since then, and perhaps especially Ed Davey, for all that they've achieved. And I can't pretend to knock on doors very often now. I probably should return to doing that to find out what people are thinking. But from what I
Matthew.
I know from what I hear from people that do go out and knock on doors, I don't think the coalition is raised as often as it once was. I think it is still raised sometimes, but I don't think it's anywhere near as much as it once was. But the fact that was something that hung around our necks for a very long time, like a lead weight, just goes to show how negative it became in the eyes of many voters, rightly or wrongly.
If you could, because you've listed, obviously you, Matthew, you disagree with a lot of things the coalitions did, but what was there? But we also listed achievements, and I think it is important to list the achievements. And like I said, smaller parties in coalitions often suffer, even when they've made incredible achievements. Was there a particular point where you thought, we should have pulled out from that coalition? Was there a particular moment, a particular point where you thought, we've gone beyond, it's gone beyond salvageable, I guess?
I mean, I think, although I don't know whether, you see, the argument is, again, it's another debate.
Or was it just anti-Toryism?
Well, I was going to say, there's a debate to be had about whether this would have done us any good either. So all of these things are hypothetical, aren't they now? But I mean, I think possibly, we perhaps should have done 4 years and then had a year. But then if we'd have pulled out, it wouldn't like we then would have had a year before the election. It would have been the election then. That's the point. And so we couldn't really pull out, could we? Because it's not like we could pull out, and I suppose the Tories could have theoretically tried to come in as a minority, but I don't think it'd have lasted very long. So it's not like there was some mechanism that meant we could pull out in 2014 and have a year out of the government before the election in 2015. That's not how British politics works. So, we had to stay in for the full term. And of course, we'd done the Parliament Act. And so I don't quite know how that would have worked. I think it was important that the government went, as much as I disagree with much of it, I think it was important that the government went full term, and we showed that we could be reliable partners, that were in it for the long haul. So I think that is important. I don't think we've spent anywhere near enough time talking about the tuition fees issue. So,
Well, hold
yeah.
that thought, because that is going to
Okay.
come up. Luke, as a rehabilitated former Tory of our panel, and we mentioned Thatcher in the last debate, and how she was uncompromising. If there's any
Don't
both
do
a
the voice
strength and
again. Please don't do the voice.
No,
uncompromising. I wasn't going to do it, Matthew, until you mentioned it. So there you go. She was uncompromising. That was both her strength and her weakness.
Right.
And I suppose I want you to invite your former Tory self in that when that coalition happened. But do you think now, looking back, as someone who's a lot more, I'd say, more out of the panel, a lot more generous about the coalition government, probably, and I think we could all agree it was the most stable government, if that. But do you think, unlike that, do we think did the Lib Dems need some kind of Thatcher-like, red lines and say we will not compromise on this? And do you think that was part of our demise? And then obviously we can then talk about tuition fees after your point, Luke.
Perhaps, but I always ask, red lines on what? I understand the argument about proportional representation, but the Tories were never going to go for it. So what was Clegg supposed to do?
No, but
What
on
was
something
he
like
actually supposed to do?
but Luke, on something like tuition fees, I really do believe that David Cameron needed us that much to have a stable government and to have 5 years at least as Prime Minister, that if we'd have said, not to abolish fees, I don't think that was possible, but for these 5 years at least, we will not be raised, he would have agreed. And the only reason that didn't happen was, and I've been reliably told this, was that Nick Clegg never supported the abolish tuition fees policy anyway. He had to go with it because in the Lib Dems, members make policy, and that was our policy as decided by conference. But I've been told he couldn't wait to be rid of that policy, and entering that government meant that he was able to say to us, well, I'm sorry, little Lib Dem members, I know this is what you believe, and I know this is why we've had almost all of our MPs elected, certainly in big university towns and cities, but actually, sorry, I've entered this coalition now, and now, well, what can I do? What can I do? So from what I've been told, he never liked that policy and was glad to be rid of it, even though it ended up almost killing the party off.
Luke, if you could respond to my original one and then also Matthew's response as well.
Sorry, Andy, just ask the question again. What was your original one?
Oh, goodness, you're asking me now. I'm trying to remember. Basically, should we have had red lines? And you mentioned about red lines on what? And you mentioned about, the electoral reform, which I think another one we will expand on. So it's about, and also looking at it from both your former Tory sort of years and then now in your Lib Dem kind of comfort zone. I hope that made sense. Don't ask me again, Luke.
Yeah. I think
I will have to go judge duty on you guys at some point. It's getting closer. So yeah, carry on.
Well, I'll only give my opinion on it, but I think Clegg was very, very focused on the economy. I think that's personally, because I remember him in an interview. He was on The Rest Is Politics the other month, and he said apparently he was sat in his office, and one of his advisors came to him and said, "Don't you know that the banks have toxic liabilities of about 6 times the UK economy?" And he was like, goodness me. So I think he was laser focused on the economy, but perhaps you could accuse him of being weak.
Naive is what I accuse him of being. Naive.
Yeah, weakness there. I mean, let's actually, so tuition fees, because I promised we kind
He
of
had no
touched on
fight
that.
in him, did he? Let's face it, he had no fight in him. I mean, I remember by 2014, 2015, he was non-existent. The Tories, we were
I
at the
I
time,
think
we were
I,
literally in
I really
control.
do I really do think that Clegg, David Laws, Danny Alexander, perhaps Joe Swinson, these people from that wing of the party were just and good on him. They were government ministers when they didn't think they'd ever would be as Lib Dem MPs. Good on them. Of course they were happy. I'm not saying they shouldn't have been happy. Very exciting moment for them. Very proud moment for their families. But it was too much the ministerial cars and the ministerial boxes and the big offices and the important planes, and not enough on the actual politics of what this would mean for our voters and for our party. And you can say as much as you want. Nick Clegg said there was blue in the face. The thing that he put through over tuition fees, the policy was ultimately fairer. No one cared less. I mean, I accept that may well have been the fact of the matter, but he had, in that one act, he breached trust with our voters, and we've only just begun to get it back. And you can talk till you're blue in the face about the details of the policy, but it breached trust. You can't go from basing your whole election campaign on, if we form a government, we will abolish tuition fees, to then saying not only that we're entering coalition with the Tories for one, but we're going to do the exact opposite and triple fees, and think that your voters are going to stick with you and understand why that is happening.
I mean, I think that has to. I mean, if we can separate the politics of the Lib Dems with the politics of Nick Clegg, so Nick Clegg personally didn't want to have, abolishing tuition fees as a policy. But I think broadly, even within the parliamentarians, it was something they supported, and I think, it was probably a mistake for them to have put that on election posters of like, our commitments or something like that. But, I think we do have to be mindful, Matthew, but I think, we were in a coalition. I know we had 57 MPs, and I definitely think there were times in which, Luke might not agree about the red lines or compromise on what, but I do think we have to be mindful that we were in a coalition, and Luke will like this, the bond markets, the deficit and stuff like that. And and again, we have to make compromise. That's the difficulties and the reality when you are in those coalitions.
But Andy,
as much as I go on,
but Andy, this was a totemic policy. This is what we won those 57 MPs on, and especially in the big university cities and towns that we held at that time. It was students who turned out for us in their thousands to vote for us, and they did not vote to elect Lib Dem MPs. Number one, they didn't vote for us to go into coalition with the Tories, for one. I think they could have just about have lived in that, but to then double that with not just not abolishing fees, but actually tripling fees. And by the way, I was on a panel in I think it was the 2015, it must have been the 2015 election. I represented one of our parliamentary candidates in Leicester that couldn't make a debate, and so I went along. And the Labour guy, really came, as you'd expect, right? The Labour guy really came with me on tuition fees. And I'll have to send you both a clip of this because it's on YouTube somewhere. And I said, and got actually, so he was given quite a bit of applause for that, but the guy came to me next, as you'd expect. And I ended up getting a big round of applause because I said, look, was it my party's proudest moment? No, but I am not going to take lectures from Labour, who said they wouldn't introduce tuition fees in the first place and then did, and said they wouldn't introduce top-up fees in the first place and then did. So I'll take no lectures from Labour on tuition fees. So, but just as much as they broke their pledges, I'm afraid we broke ours, and there's no point in pretending that we did. And when you have a totemic, sorry, Andy, let me just get this out. When you have a totemic policy like that, as I say, you can talk about the detail till you're blue in the face. It doesn't matter. All people remember is the breach of trust.
I'll say that. I'll say very quickly that, my opinions at university, I didn't support the tuition fee, but I think they should at least abstained, at least as a bare minimum. So, maybe I didn't explain myself, Matthew, but,
No.
But
But
Luke,
can we
bringing
just can we just
Luke,
get
if we
can we just get Luke
Luke,
thoughts on that?
can we
Yeah.
just can we just invite Luke? Yep, Luke.
Yeah, I mean, I did even say at the time as a Tory, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this. I even said privately to a fellow Tory, I said, I don't know why the Lib Dems are so harshly judged on this when the two main parties break promises all the time.
Not quite.
And well, I think we're all living from the consequences of this now because, because the Liberal Party of old and the Lib Dems that came after, they benefited as being, my dad would always say, oh, it's a wasted protest vote. But the word I want to pick out there is protest vote. And I think there were a lot of voters who probably didn't really, even if they thought our policies was not realistic, they at least thought, well, it's a protest because I'm sick of Labour, I'm sick of the Tories. Oh, they're all the same, they're all the same. And I think we're living from that. So, Luke, do you think we're living through that consequence? Because Matthew is right. And like I said in my opener, it was a betrayal. The tuition fees was a betrayal. And if we believe George Osborne, they had an opportunity which Nick Clegg overruled, and only Charles Kennedy and Tim Farron, two former leaders, voted against the tuition fees. And do you think? And now we're seeing it from Reform, which I think that's why they're benefiting from it. The anti-politics. Do you think there's some truth, a kernel of truth in that? That no matter how much the logistics were, presentation-wise, it was not great.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why Reform are rising today, because the public view the governments, Labour, Conservatives, I mean, what's the nickname? Uni Party. They call them the Uni Party now, don't they? That they're all the same. They break the promises. But you have to think, what I often think is, could you be Prime Minister? Because I couldn't. Could you be Chancellor? Because I couldn't. And I think a lot of parties make those promises, and then they get into government, and the realities of government and situations hit them, and they think, "Oh my, actually, yeah, we can't do this." I can see why that the previous government did that, or yeah, it's a bit harder than we thought. I honestly think that's what goes on.
Can I answer
Yeah.
the question of a few minutes ago, which was why are the Lib Dems more harshly judged when the two big parties break their promises all the time? It was because, and I'll be honest here, we put ourselves on a pedestal that we are the party you can trust. And I'll always remember in the last Prime Minister's questions before, and again, you can go and watch this on YouTube. It's a great 15-minute session. But the last Prime Minister's questions before the 97 election. So John Major's final PMQs as Prime Minister, and Ashdown, in fact, both Blair and Ashdown, but Ashdown asked about some report that John Major, they allege, was stopping from being published about some of the allegations that had been made against various of his MPs of improper conduct, etc. I always remember John Major's line back to Ashdown was, so Ashdown had said something like, John Major and his government ends this parliament under an accusation of sleaze, blah, 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 blah. Really good from Paddy. And John Major said, the honourable gentleman ends as pious and pompous as he's been throughout this parliament. And there was kind of the feeling that the Lib Dems saw ourselves as better than these parties. And so you can't put yourself in that space that we are better and then say as an excuse, well, all parties break their promises. You can't do that.
I suppose the lesson here is that if you're going to want to seriously form a government, like David Steele, prepare for government speech, you need to really do the hard work on like the numbers, the maths, I mean, I hate when parties say, the fully costed manifesto, because they all do that. And then the IFS always goes, well, actually, no, there's some holes here. It's like every election time, they say, no, that wouldn't work, that tax wouldn't work, that would, and the IFS is not the IAA, so, it's an independent, very independent.
I swear by the IFS. I remember debating, just quickly, a socialist healthcare student at university, and she went, "Oh, Luke, can you honestly not effing fart without citing the IFS or the OBR?"
I did tweet. I did tweet. I think earlier today, and I thought Luke might see it and reply, but perhaps he didn't. Perhaps he didn't see it. Not that I would tweet something, just to be provocative and get Luke to reply. I mean, of course, I'd never do that at all. But I did. I did tweet earlier today. Is there not more in life and the
I
economy
saw that.
than just growth? And I thought Luke's bound to reply, but I don't think you did.
No,
I can reply now. You-
Yeah, you've just invited. You like my Thatcher impression. You've just invited that now. But there we go. I will say the Brown report from the was it the Brown report they tried to do with the university fees? I mean, I think we have to remember that it wasn't just, oh, we're just going to willy-nilly raise fees. They did actually have a report, because I think there is questions about. I mean, I do support, a greater welfare system and lifelong learning. I think it should be like healthcare, cradle to the grave, lifelong learning. But there has to be questions about sustainability, and I do support free tuition fee. But I think, I don't want a system where it's like, oh, I've done my first degree, now I'm going to do a second degree. That would just be, to the point like, well, really? You've had this free, and now, so there has to be questions of funding sustainability. So,
Right.
but there we go. But anyway, so
well, to be fair, in what I'll defend the I'm going to stick my neck out. Universities are complaining that the current tuition fees are not high enough. So could you imagine if you kept them
I've
at
got a
3,000?
friend that said that.
Well,
Yeah.
I think the people at the top of universities often have questions to answer. Actually, I mean, of course they're always going to ask for more money. Of course they are. Whether they should always be given more money, I think, is a different matter. I know you might think I'm Mr. Big Spending, but I think we always,
You're
this
a
is
Marxist. According to Talk TV.
This is
really
well Ian, my friend, my wonderful friend Ian Dale of LBC fame, who sometimes has me on his show, bless his heart. So I better be nice about him, and I've written for his book, so I'd even more better be nice about him. But he messaged me the other day, and I know he won't mind me sharing this. I mean, it was a private message, but I know he won't mind me sharing this. He said, Matthew, you're not a liberal at all. You're a big state socialist. He said to me the other day. I said, I'm really not. I'm really not. I mean, actually, I support the private sector. I just don't think it's the same as the public sector. I don't think that makes me a big state socialist. I don't think it does. I mean, you tell me if you think different. But and I think money has to be spent wisely. And I think universities have to be questioned about, if they are going to be given more money, where that money is being spent. So I do think that is important, and it may well be that the system was fairer as a result of that. But as I say, that became not the point. The point was the breach of trust. That was the point.
Yeah, I mean, no matter how much they tried to mitigate it, because they did do the level in which you could, you would start paying it, and they did loads of things for the coalition to mitigate it. But presentation wise, it was just god awful for our party, and then issues on funding, like the student loans and stuff. I've heard someone say it was years ago. It was a HGV CEO, and he's saying on the radio, saying, I don't know because they're just struggling for HGV drivers since Brexit, which we're still reeling from. And he said, he says it's so expensive for the costs. He says, I think there should be a student loan system for that. And he was making that case and argument, and also apprenticeships as well in like healthcare and blah, blah, blah. But let's move on, because I think we've talked about the tuition fees quite enough. So let's go on the next red lines, and are seen as like, at least in our elite, maybe not for the public, but at least in our own liberal Lib Dem politics, voting reform. So context, if part of the deal was that the Conservatives agreed to have a referendum, but not on proportional representation, but on the alternative vote, which is a vote that is used most famously in Australia, where they rank their choice. It's still a first past the post system, so you're voting for individual MPs and constituencies, not like large PR sort of regions and counties. But you get to rank your choices, and whoever gets 50% or more, basically, 50% plus one becomes elected. Who do I go first? Matthew. Matthew, do you think we should have pushed harder on electoral reform? Do you think the AV referendum was a shoddy compromise? And do you think, and the campaign itself, because Nick Clegg really put, much like how Cameron suffered with the Brexit votes, Nick Clegg became the front and centre of that AV referendum. So, yeah.
Well, I was part of the AV campaign in Leicester in 2014, and quite interesting actually, because the person who led the East Midlands campaigning for AV is now the Labour MP for part of Nottinghamshire, Michael Payne, and so I know Michael a little bit as a result of that referendum campaign back in 2014. It was a dire campaign. I mean, it was dire. I mean, I didn't fully pretend to fully understand it. I just knew that it was mildly fairer than first past the post. And look, I think it was Clegg attempting to throw some red meat to Lib Dem supporters and members, but it almost would have been better if we hadn't had any kind of referendum on it, because I mean it was just, we either needed a referendum on PR or it was pretty pointless doing it, and it just made us look a bit silly.
Luke, I don't know what your thoughts were on that, but like same to Matthew, do you think it was that should have been, because you said compromise, compromise on what, but do you think that should have been the red line? And just to throw my 2 cents here, I know the Tories would never have agreed to having proportional representation because, well, they might do now because they're doing so terribly, but historically, they've benefited from first past the post. So that's something, and I think, to be honest, if I'm being cynical, I think if we won an outright majority, part of me, I hope not, but part of me think we would probably go, oh no, we might, like how Justin Trudeau suddenly decided in Canada, oh, we're not going to have proportional representation because he got this majority. But I would have personally have said to Cameron, if I was Clegg's advisor, I would say to Cameron, right, we know we aren't going to get proportional representation in national elections, Westminster, but let's have it for local elections, because then you're making movements and people will get adjusted and used to it. So that's my own view. But do you think that should have been the red line on electoral reform? And was Clegg the wrong person to have been leading that campaign on the referendum?
I think the problem with AV, well, was it AV or AV Plus? I mean, nobody understood it.
Alternative
I
voting
didn't get it.
system, and AV Plus was a Roy Jenkins suggestion when he did the commission for Tony Blair, and it's basically AV, and you get proportional representation as like a top up.
Yeah, I didn't understand it, but I can say as a former Tory,
Rehabilitated.
he could have, he could have pushed for PR as much as he liked. We would never have accepted that. No way. He'd have just been screaming into fresh air there if he pushed for PR. I'm sorry, but
on locals,
there is no way the Tories would have accepted that.
Even on local elections?
No.
Interesting. Okay.
But then it was quite. But then it would have been better to have just not have had any campaign, in my view. Any referendum.
Yeah.
The one thing I would have liked to see Nick Clegg push on more, and I think he might have got some agreement from Cameron, is drugs reform. But I never heard anything from him on that.
Right.
What reform?
Drugs reform.
Treating it as a healthcare issue. It was quite big in the news at the time.
It was big in Scotland as well, like massively. Yeah.
And Cameron had said, well, as a backbencher, Cameron had said really quite liberal things on drugs reform. So yeah, I mean, I think it would have been nice to have seen on things like that, some real tangible liberal policies coming out of that government, considering that it was supposed to be allegedly a liberal Tory party, right? And so it would have been really good to have seen policies like that. I mean, again, the only kind of big liberal thing that came out was equal marriage, and most Tory MPs voted against that. So this is an interesting question for Luke. Actually,
environment.
And the environment. So this is an interesting question for Luke. Actually, is yeah, Cameron may have been a Cameroon, and those around him may have been Cameroons. But how Cameroonified really was the Tory party? How deep did it go? Because it appears to have not got very deep at all.
No, right. So we were split into two main factions. There were the One Nation moderates, and then there were the Thatcherites, which you now call Reform. So the Tories now are basically taken over by the right wing section, but a lot of them have also left. They've gone to Reform. But most of the Tories didn't agree with the Cameroon project at all. In fact, now I even doubt how much of a Cameroon was. I think arguably he was just saying a lot of this to say, hey, look, the Tories are now Paddington Bear. But actually, he didn't believe in a lot of it. Because Saida Vorsi, who was supposed to be the poster of the new Reform Liberal Tory party, he got rid of her in no time.
Well, quite. And actually, wasn't it just his response to Blair that he felt that to win,
yes,
he had to be the heir of Blair, right?
To Blair.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly true.
Right.
I think all three leaders in the 2010 were all competing to be heir to Blair. You know, Gordon Brown, Nick Clegg, and David Cameron. Really, I will just say, I think. Much like, I mean, this is why I hate when people say, oh, we shouldn't have coalitions, blah, blah, blah. But even political parties are coalitions within themselves, as Luke describes about the three factions. Labour have their own. Lib Dems, a bit more, it's just split in two, usually social liberals, orange bookers. And I just think electoral reform would liberate a lot of these political parties, because I will admit, there are times where, like the last conversation, and I'll let Matthew expand and then Luke, that we do suffer as we are. I mean, I like Big Tent politics. That is just generally my politics, and I would call myself a radical centrist, and I think Lib Dems are as close to my politics as they can be. But I think all parties suffer with our electoral system, in which, in order to play the game, you have to be in a political party, and then factions emerge, and I think I'll give Reform and your party, Jeremy Corbyn's, at least they, quite scarily in my view, have a base, a membership, and ideology. But then even they'll probably have splits and factions. So it does frustrate me when people say, oh, coalitions don't work, because they exist now. Most first, and recent times, first past the post has not produced strong and stable government. And I will defend to death that actually the coalition years of recent times has been, since post 2010, it's been the better government. But yeah, Matthew, I'll bring you in, and then Luke can have a say.
So a couple of points really quickly. So first of all, if you consider the new Labour government as one government, so the Blair Brown years, I think that was the best government of my lifetime. But I would put the coalition second, quite a way behind, but I would put the coalition second. I'd then put John Major's government, as much as I hated it at the time in the mid-90s, third. I then put Thatcher, because as much as I hated her, at least she had some kind of decency in her politics. And then I'd put the Johnson, Truss rest of the years beneath that. And we don't know about this government yet. We'll judge it after it is finished. So yeah, I mean, absolutely, the coalition was one of the better governments of my lifetime. But do I wish it had done more stuff to, help the poor? I guess it did a lot to help the poorest in other countries. The irony was it could have done much more to help the poorest in this country. But as I say, I'll never wholly attack a government that extended liberty for millions of people like me and other gay and bi people in this country. I could never, I'm an LGBT plus campaigner. I'm a gay man. I could never condemn that, and I think it is one of the great achievements. I think it was the best achievement of the Lib Dems' time in that coalition government. But do I wish we'd been a bit braver? Do I wish we'd been a bit less naive? Do I wish that we didn't just go out and defend things that were indefensible and leave the Tories cackling behind their hands saying, oh, they've gone out and defended it again? Yeah, I mean, do I wish we'd just been a bit stronger in those terms? Yeah, I absolutely do. And I'm afraid, the electorate had their say, and they had their say in a big way. And we were left with barely a rump of MPs, and it was only last year that we really recovered from that.
Look,
Yeah, I prefer big tent parties myself, whether we have PR or first past the post. I don't think parties on ideological purity work. I mean, let's suppose the Lib Dems were just pure orange book. Well, that's great, but you know, how are we supposed to appeal to the rest of the electorate? And that's what I always say about Corbyn's Labour or the Your Party. We're not going to appeal beyond our base.
But,
So if you have
but
broad
isn't the
base,
but isn't the answer to that, Luke? And I broadly agree with you, but just to play devil's advocate for a moment, isn't the answer to that under PR you can have lots of different smaller parties that do just appeal to one part of the electorate, and so you would have a kind of yellow book social liberal party, you'd have a kind of orange book liberal party that work together a lot because on lots of things they would agree, but on economies etc. They don't. And don't you think that we're actually becoming? Me and Andy were having this because we're recording this on Bank Holiday Monday, folks, and I've just spent a fantastic weekend with Andy, bless him. We had a fab time at Hinckley Pride, and then yesterday we went to the local church, etc. And it was just fab. And we had lots of chats, didn't we, Andy? It was fabulous. And one of the things we talked about was that we did. It was good. It was really good. And one of the things that we talked about was that we're becoming a multi-party system, even under first past the post, and it'll be really interesting to see at the next election how that plays out, because we now have Labour, Reform. Notice I put Reform second. We have the Tories. Who predictions? I mean, I can't quite allow myself to believe this, but the predictions are is that the Tories could have as few as 30 odd seats. I can't quite believe that myself, but it could well be beneath 100 seats. I think that is a bit more realistic. We've got the Lib Dems that the predictions are is that we'll stay somewhere where we are, or possibly go up to about 100 seats, which would be fantastic. You've got the Greens, who depending on who they elect as their, you've got the Greens who depending on who they elect as their leader, could have quite an expansion. You've got Your Party, which will take, whatever you think of them, will take a certain part of will appeal to a certain part of the electorate. So we're almost becoming a European-style multi-party democracy, even under first past the post. And I wonder, with an increasingly sophisticated electorate, whether we'll end up with PR like by proxy. We'll end up having to have PR because our new way of being as a multi-party democracy will mean that we just have to have PR.
Luke?
I'm going to go further. I think we're witnessing the end of Labour and the Tories. I'll just be quite honest with you. Right. I think they're done. I think unless something turns around massively in the next 4 or 5 years, I think the public's had enough. I really do. But let me go back onto PR, because sure, I could have my FDP orange book style liberal, but on economics, what are we actually going to get passed through? We might not get anything passed through. Whereas if I'm with the social liberals, let's say you two, all right, I'm not going to get ideally what I want, but I might get 20% of what I want. Well, that's better than nothing. That's how I look at it.
And also, I know as much as and I am quite critical of the coalition, I'm more on Matthew's side, but I do think it reminds us actually, compromise has to be made. And I think sometimes we have to remember the achievements we did do, like gay marriage, like ID cards was got rid of under, they actually stopped, the detention days was reduced under, again, thanks to Cameron's own personal view on that. Environment, which oh dear, that was my phone. Sorry. The environment, which Ed Davey was leading that really. So I think it's the tragedy of coalition politics. We do have to have compromises, and sometimes they are just unpopular. But I think we can all agree the presentation on some like the electoral reform and the tuition fees was not great. Right. Well, just to close off, and then we'll have. Go on.
They just have to show my picture of Nick Clegg's bubble bath on the tuition fees, and we'd have been fine.
Should I get my phone out and show the audience?
I'm really feeling a bit ill. But I think just to go back on the point that I've just made, because I think it's worth emphasising, is that if we'd have been seen and if we'd have presented ourselves as just like the other parties, it wouldn't have been such a big thing. It was because we presented ourselves as being slightly superior, right? Slightly morally
Whiter than
superior
white.
to these parties. We don't break our promises. Well, you can't do that and then do what we then did. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think we can all agree on that. Yeah. So I want to make connections with Nick Clegg and Tony Blair because we've mentioned about, the heir to Blair and stuff like that. Now, so right now, Tony Blair is oh God, have you? So Tony Blair right now is, I mean, in some ways, I feel sorry for Tony Blair because he has to have security all the time. He can't go anywhere. He's basically like most hated man in Britain, really. So I want to ask, is Nick Clegg, like, I know, for Lib Dem party politics, is Nick Clegg basically the Tony Blair of sort of Lib Dem politics, in that he's just so hated within at least within Lib Dem party politics? Probably the public are less interested because, he got a rollicking in the 2015 and then eventually lost his own seat. And do you think over time we will see a rehabilitation, and much like how Tony Blair is somewhat getting a bit of a rehabilitation now? So, Luke, I'll you first. Do you think with time Clegg will have his justice, I guess?
No, no, I'm going to be honest. It's a toxic brand, isn't it? I mean, us orange bookers now, we're hanging on by a thread. I don't even think we're massively popular even within the Lib Dems. So, and I have to give the social liberals some credit. They have rebuilt the party. To be fair to them, I have to
Quite right.
give them credit on that. I mean, we've got over 70 MPs. What are you saying, Matt Andy?
Would you consider Ed Davey a social liberal, because he did write the Orange Book, and I think a lot of people forget that.
Well, so did Vince Cable, and he wasn't an Orange Booker.
Luke. Oh yeah, and Vince Cable as well. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think he's changed his. I think he's changed his opinions. I don't see much Orange Booker economics coming out of Ed Davey today, to be quite frank.
So your answer is no. Nick Clegg will not be rehabilitated.
No. I'm arguing the losing battle on this one.
I think the really interesting thing with Blair and Clegg is that they're both now tech bros, right? And I think someone needs to write a bit. Honestly, I think someone needs to write a thesis or an essay or a book on this. And I listen to. I've still got a lot of time for Tony Blair in many respects. If you can try and put Iraq aside, which is really difficult to do, but if you can, I've still got quite a lot of time for him. But he thinks the answer to absolutely everything is technology. Now, tech is great. I love my phone. I've got my iPad just here. Tech is great, but it's not the answer to absolutely everything. And Blair seems to think it is. Now, I don't know if Clegg holds that view or not, but he has just spent all those years as one of the head honchos of Meta, and apparently was in an MMA ring with someone from Meta Wrestling. So I really don't need that mental image. Let's hope they were all in clothes. But it's interesting that they both became kind of tech bros, and that they have this view of the world. I mean, I think technology solves some problems and it creates others. That's the honest truth about technology. Has Blair been rehabilitated? I mean, I know we're going to do a whole debate on Blair, so I don't want to say too much on him.
With my good friend Nat, a female guest, because it is becoming a bit of a sausage fest at the moment.
Well, quite. But yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to that. But I would just say on him. I would just say on him now that. I mean, is he rehabilitated? I think those that quite liked him still kind of quite like him, and those that really hated him still kind of really hate him. So, I don't think that will ever change for him. He's one of the great polarizing political figures, a bit like Thatcher. I think people will still be talking about Blair kind of a century from now, probably. I don't think Nick Clegg is as hated as that by the broad electorate. But equally, I think that it's still very hard for him to rehabilitate himself. And I'm not entirely sure that writing a book, as he has done on technology, I know technology is his thing now and he considers himself an expert, but I'll be interested to see how many people buy that book, if it becomes popular or not.
I mean,
Okay.
from a non-political point of view, so from an investor point of view, macro investor point of view, we're obsessed with technology as well. We're absolutely obsessed with blockchain technology, the potential of AI. We think it's the one thing that could come in and provide infinite productivity, because we think the robots will provide infinite productivity and it'll get the world economy out of the mess it's in now.
But what about
And
human beings? What about human
but
beings, Lynn? You know,
but
remember us,
but
human beings.
but Matthew, I mean, you could, good old Marx, which I know Luke's not favorite of, but he. If we can
I love
get
Marx.
technology to a sorry, Luke, I triggered you. If we can get technology to a stage where actually we don't need to have people working, and obviously it's never going to get that far, but people can have like reduced hours, keep their pay because technology and automation. Obviously we need to change the structure of, I'm not a social, not a communist economy, but if we get to that stage and people can enjoy the fruits of that through a universal basic income and stuff
Well,
like
quite.
that. And people
That's
can
what we.
have more
Yeah,
leisure
quite.
time and do a lot more creative art and stuff like that. Then I'm not opposed to technology.
No, no.
It's just
But
who
the answer
it's
to
just
that.
who's driving that. It's
Yeah.
who's driving that.
But the
So I
answer
think
to the answer to that, in my view, is not to have robots take over everything. The answer to that, the way to get that, and you've just said it
there's a
there in your own
robot on my
answer.
screen.
The answer to that, you've just said in your own answer, is to have a universal basic income. And actually, I know that is something that all three of us agree
Agree.
on. And again, me and Andy were talking about it. I think yesterday when we were saying that right wingers probably have a different reason for agreeing with the UBI than left wingers. But interestingly, it's a policy that can unite both wings of politics. And the reason I support it is that it'd make us less slavish to having to work, 40 odd hours a week, and would give us more baseline security, meaning that we could then do the things that, as Andy quite rightly has just said, gives us joy as human beings. We can do more sport, we can do more art, we can write more books, we can read more books, we can do whatever makes us really happy. And again, I'd love to be supporting UBI, the Lib Dem policy. I think we support a guaranteed income, which actually isn't quite a basic income, but I mean it's a step in the right.
Like a progress.
Yeah, it's a step in the right direction. But I think all three of us support that. So yeah.
Yeah. Because I'm mindful of time, because I think as much as I'd love to do a whole, we could do a whole series on the coalition, but I think I try and keep it within the 1 hour 30 mark. So I think let's all of us have closing remarks, and if we can try and keep it a bit tight, or else I'm going to be really mean on the editing. So if we can try and keep it tight, so I usually, like I said, I normally start with Matthew, but I think this time I'm going to start with Luke, and then and then Matthew, and then myself, and then close it. So yeah, Luke, closing
Yeah.
remarks, just generally.
Yeah, for all the faults of the coalition, did they give us a legacy to be proud of? Yes, I think so. I think we can look back and say, yeah, we cut the deficit, we cut unemployment, we gave school choice, we did the equal marriage. Yeah, I think they gave us a legacy to be proud of there.
Matthew?
So thanks, Andy. And this
is that Luke?
Yeah.
Matthew.
This has been a really fun and exciting debate that I've really enjoyed. Look, I think as I say, I'll never condemn a government that gave me and millions of other gay and bi people more equality under the law than we've ever had in our lifetime. And I think Lynn Featherstone should absolutely go down in the Liberal and Lib Dem history books for that legislation. And of course the millions of activists that I'm talking about, just the parliamentary part of that, and Lynn always makes the point that she was just doing the final bit of work of thousands of activists across the country, and of course that is quite right. But in terms of the parliamentary bit of this, the political bit of this, I think Lynn should go down in history. But I'm really talking about this from a party point of view, and the fact is it was almost the death of our party. We almost ceased to be a parliamentary party. Now, would we have carried on yet, because we had thousands of councillors and still ran at the time many councils? But who knows whether we would have got back into Parliament? I assume we probably would have at some point, but it would have been quite a tough struggle. So from a purely party point of view, Nick Clegg was almost the death of us.
And my final remarks. I got so centrist, am I? Crippling centrist. At the time, my times at university, yes, I was critical of the coalition. In fact, it convinced me so much. I was, and the betrayal of the tuition fees made me join the Labour Party. And they weren't even advocating for free tuition fees. They were advocating at the time a graduate tax. But I thought, you know what, it's better than the mess that they left us now. But I do think, and I don't know if this is because our country has suffered due to the unstable governments of the last Tory government, the kind of chaos of Keir Starmer's government that we're seeing now. But I must say, whether it's a low bar or not, I do look back at the coalition and I do think a lot more favourably, at least stability. It gives us that stability that was needed at a time when most people thought it wouldn't even last a week. But they did it. It was hard work. And the politics of compromise really, I think, showed full fruit. Now, do I think they've made mistakes? Absolutely. And I still, on tuition fees, hold a personal, at university, I was never going to benefit from free universities, but I do believe in education at university, So that's just how I feel. I feel like it's been rehabilitated now and I can look back a lot more fondly, but still there's issues. So there you go. There's your centrist dad answer. Thank you both again, Luke and George, for joining on this. I think a lot more colourful and a lot more lively debate this time. So we're finally getting the drama now. Yes. We need to see more of this. And again, if you like this debate and you like this channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and to like this video. And until next time, see you later. Goodbye.